You just heard Out of Hand from the Out of Hand EP from 1994 from Entombed, and this is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And we decided to attack an old standby band that's a good old reliable Entombed, and do sort of a left of center approach with them tonight. So we're going to kind of look at some of their the EPs from the, I guess you could call it the Nicky era, correct? Because they've done EPs beyond like Black Juju and Wreckage and all kinds of
in '97 Earache put this out as just a self-titled Entombed that had a lot of these on it, but we're going to be playing some other stuff from like the Hollow Man EP and some other stuff that's, I guess it's all pretty easy to find on the internet anymore, so nothing's really that hard to find.
It's not so obscure.
But it used to be kind of a nice collection because the stuff from like the Crawl EP or Stranger Aeons and a lot of that stuff was tough to find. You'd have to like special order the EPs for like $18 or something.
And I remember the Out of Hand single vaguely kind of floating around, but it was not anything that like anybody I knew really had.
I picked it up at White Earp Records, famously known for putting out the Repulsion record, Horrified, back in the day, and being a kind of big proponent of the underground. But yeah, I found that there on vinyl and got Danzig 4 the same time, I think it was.
Now, were they probably had it because of the Repulsion cover? Is that why Wyatt Earp happened to be stocking Out of Hand EPs? Or?
They carried all kinds of crazy stuff, and the way the place was set up too was like all the CDs were just like up on shelves, and you had to like kind of like lean over the counter and look at the spines and squint to see what was going on. And this was like when vinyl had a little bit of a resurgence in the early '90s.
Yeah, but what I remember most about this song in particular is because, of course, most people know it because it shows up on Wolverine Blues.
Yeah.
But, this song itself was just such a, clearly different from anything that Entombed had ever done up until this point.
Yeah,
in terms of
totally
social commentary and
yeah, and it was more, it was bringing like the whole rock and roll mentality that I guess Wolverine Blues had more of. It was still pretty rooted in death metal to a big degree, but then when To Ride came out a couple years later, this is kind of like I think the one connecting the through point. It's funny, it's like the last song too. It's like maybe one of the last things they wrote. Well,
I feel like too, like it was rooted in sort of death metal, especially with like Jesus Christ Lord of Flies in Disguise, some of that kind of stuff. But then like it kind of went, I don't know, just a different direction with Fools Gather Round. It just didn't seem like standard death metal type, charred remains and
most of the Entombed stuff up to that point was just all about it's like zombie lyrics are just weird, kind of like you didn't know what to make out of a lot of the stuff. Is just kind of like random horror stuff, or it was all movie related.
And talking about by going back to burning books, ripping apart things that doesn't fit. 1 × 1 = 9. Your make believe reality is full of shit. It was sort of a more succinct attack on religion than like just talking about like satanic themes or other things that death metal bands were sort of doing at the time. And
and actually Entombed never really got too satanic.
No, really. But I'm just saying in terms of the assault on religion.
About the establishment and it was more of a punk rock kind of aesthetic.
Yeah. And this is where you definitely started to see and hear a lot more of the sort of punk elements, like kind of into what they were doing.
Yeah, so. And we're like feedback, and every song was starting to start out with like a bunch of noise.
Yeah.
Which
a lot of Hellraiser stuff going on at this time too. We sort of noticed, but I mean, a lot of the stuff that they were doing, and I remarked to I was talking to you about this off camera, as you will, or off mic, that they were doing an incredible amount of covers. It seemed at one point, and almost so many now that they've even put out this.
It's a double disc, Sons of Satan Sings His Praise or something. They came out in like the 2000s sometime, but it has every single cover they did up to that point.
I think it was 2002, and here's why I remember that, because I think I was student teaching in England, and we went on a weekend trip to Paris, and I walked into a record store in Paris, and I remember the two things I saw is I remember that came out, and I was like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah.
And it was like super expensive, of course, and then Opeth Deliverance. There was Damnation, which was like the non-metal one, and then Deliverance.
Really go back and listen to that.
And I think I bought Deliverance like two or 3 weeks before it came out in America, and I remember emailing you guys, and you guys were like, not you, but probably more Chris was like reasonably annoyed that like I had a copy of it or something, but yeah. So I remember,
and basically pre-internet to a mass amount at that point. I mean, you could email and stuff, but as far as like I guess probably torrenting and stuff existed to some degree then too, but it wasn't just like you couldn't just go on YouTube and listen to a song.
No. So it was kind of a big deal when you got a hold of something like that. But anyways, so the Out of Hand EP, features these two next songs that we're going to kind of get into, God of Thunder and Black Breath. And I was commenting to you that this is the first time I heard God of Thunder. And so I heard
because I got Destroyer as a kid.
Yeah. And see, I never grew up with Kiss in that way. Like my first, because Kiss was so dead in the water when I was sort of coming of age in the late 80s, early 90s.
It was like Hot in the Shade.
Well,
kind of era.
Or like Revenge or any of that kind of stuff.
Revenge isn't a bad record now.
Well, sure, but it was
for all intents and purposes,
I knew Kiss as like an '80s hair metal band. That's how I thought of them. I didn't know about the makeup era so much. I mean, I was aware of it because I'd seen visuals of it, but it didn't really play much of a part. And then two things happened like around the time that I probably encountered, God of Thunder from these guys was. I think the Dazed and Confused movie came out with the soundtrack, and that brought the video for Rock and Roll All Night, which featured footage from Kiss Alive and Dazed and Confused the movie, and that was running on Headbangers Ball sometimes.
Yeah, and 96 is when the
Kiss Unplugged came out, where they had all the
that was
original.
Before, actually.
I think that was like 94.
Yeah, because then the reunion came.
Yeah,
where
that was like the first time they started coming.
I don't even remember what that album was so terrible. I forget what it's called, but that's when they were actually doing the reunion concerts.
Was it Psycho Clowns?
Psycho Circus. We're at the Psycho Circus. Yeah, the Paul Stanley list was in full effect.
But anyways, the God of Thunder, great Kiss song, and really Entombed does it quite a bit of service.
It's amazing kind of how you look at some of the random choices they make, Stiff Little Fingers and Unsane and Rocky Erickson, and it all kind of makes sense under the umbrella of Entombed.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, it
Captain
probably
Beyond
seemed pretty left of center, but then now you look at what Entombed does post Nicky, and even near the end of Nicky, where it kind of goes in this death and roll sort of kind of transition. And I was commenting to you, had there been a band, what was your reaction when you first got a hold of Out of Hand, and then obviously Wolverine Blues, because it was such a a left of center.
Yeah, I think I got Wolverine Blues before, I believe.
Did you get Hollow Man then first before Wolverine Blues?
We had an advanced cassette because we were getting service from Columbia at the time, so we had an advanced cassette of that along that and Heartwork quite a ways before it actually came out.
Sure.
So we but it wasn't a full tape. I think it had God, what was it? It was 3 songs each, and that was just stuck in my or 3 songs on the tape or something, 2 on one side, 1 on the other.
And you dug it? It didn't
we were
shock
so
you that,
no, I think we were so kind of just stoked to hear something new because we've been kind of just dealing with those last couple records for a while, and just the rate we were consuming stuff. I don't know, it wasn't the same kind of anticipation factor because we were still relatively new into the. I guess we've been in the scene for 3 years or something, but at that point it was just we were looking at so much new stuff. They were oh, cool, new Entombed thing, and it didn't really throw us off too much, and we weren't as dismissive as a lot of people are, scenesters are with certain things oh, this isn't true anymore, I don't want to listen to it. What does that even mean?
Yeah,
to a certain point, but
I mean, it was still raw. It was just catchier. And,
yeah, we were just surprised. I mean, the whole Earache Columbia thing was just really weird to us that we were seeing getting all this Fudge Tunnel merch stuff and just weird, the subway I've still got a. It's a 6x4 foot Entombed subway posters from Wolverine Blues.
That's pretty awesome.
Which Nicky's wearing a Destroyer t-shirt on as well. Which he's been. You look at a lot of interviews and Kiss is one of his the first bands he really got into.
Sure, and you hear you can almost hear it in some of the stuff they did in this era, and then of course with helicopters and things
so there's
that.
So many Ace Frehley leads and stuff. It's not even funny, but
yeah. But and then of course Black Breath from Repulsion, we were kind of talking about, which of course is a band.
That made me go after hearing that again. It made me go back and listen because Horrified was pretty rough and I'm pretty raw at the time, and Relapse put out that version of it in when was that 2004?
It was earlier than that. I think it was 2002 or something.
Okay, because they put out the original version that I had. It was a purple and greenish. Kind of cover they put out years before that. I remember I had it, but I didn't really get it.
Yeah, you
that much. It was so raw. And same with early Autopsy. I didn't really get that when it first came out, but a couple years after, it started making a little bit more sense.
Sure.
But that it kind of that shows the breadth of their influence right there. They're just they're kind of just like a rock and roll band when it comes down to a lot of this stuff.
They were
they
like
just happened to start as death metal as 15-year-old kids.
A bunch of death metal kids that really loved rock and roll. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
a lot of that's probably Nicky and Uwe rubbing off more than a lot of the other guys, but
because Uwe was into punk quite a bit, right?
Yeah,
you know,
I think he kind of came out of the more like the crusty thing, and so did like Nicky was in a lot of like punk stuff before all the death metal. I think that's why death metal has such a weird
and that would make sense
sound
for like the use of like the D beat in a lot of like Entombed music. You know,
and that whole kind of like that kind of D beat crust scene was like huge and. Like, when was that? Like 86, 87, 88 in Sweden. There's just tons and tons of those bands popping out. So, like, there weren't... I don't know how many, like, metal dudes were going into... Because I know, like, Johnny Hellid from, Unleashed, that was a Nihilist. He was more of a metal guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's not really a punk edge to what Unleashed does or anything.
I think most of the other dudes are just kind of, like, whatever. But I know Nicky for sure, and Nicky and Uwe were just, they were kind of like the punk rock torchbearers of this stuff. So it was like, it seemed like that was kind of like the punk mentality to like, what can you do past, D-beat punk and what can you do past metal? Well, this stuff, we have this box we step on where everything sounds amazing. Why not go for that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I probably heard this Black Breath cover before I ever heard Repulsion too. You know, I mean, that's the oddity of
Repulsion at that point really wasn't, I don't think they were known in the underground, but they didn't have much of a, above ground, for lack of a better term, like, presence. Like people in the know really knew who they were, but that was kind of like Relapse put that thing out in like maybe 91. They might have put it out because it was like in limbo, like with rights, and at one point Earache was going to put it out, and then White Earp ended up putting the thing out. But yeah, that was just kind of tough to find, and just underground legends more than anything.
Yeah, it is sort of strange how I feel like the older people get, like the evolution of like the respect of a band like Repulsion just continues to grow to the point where, it wasn't #1 greatest grindcore record of all time, voted in Decibel and things like that. And, it's sort of like we were talking.
And it made it in the death metal as well.
Yeah, and we were
it's
talking.
Just one of those crossover records.
Well, it's strange how certain records like attain more like momentum as like history sort of moves forward a bit.
And I think the reason that one gets so much respect too is because they never did anything else outside of like they did an EP, and that's about it. They've never gone back and redone anything, which hats off to them. Why?
Sure.
Why bother? It's it's like if you go see Kiss or Twisted Sister, you don't want to hear their new stuff. It's kind of like a moment in time, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is just strange because earlier we were talking about film criticism and films and all that stuff when we were looking up like the Sight and Sound top greatest movies of all time, and how every 10 years it sort of evolves, and like there's like sort of a shifting with the winds of like how critics view certain films, and Vertigo just like went to the top and it supplanted
which used to
Citizen Kane
completely
and stuff like that.
Panned when
yeah,
it came
exactly.
out,
and it's just sort of strange how like I don't know the evolution of how we interpret things. And definitely Repulsion's on the plus
I think
side
same almost with like Siege, who basically I think put out just that one record.
Yeah, Drop Dead.
Yeah,
that's pretty much.
And
it.
that I think the reason like there was the name, and then there's just that one thing. And then, like, the time it came out, so that's...
Well, and then Napalm constantly name-dropping them, too, I think helped. And I think a lot of these
and just tape trading undergrounds.
Name-dropping Repulsion, too, helped, so...
And they didn't really fit in a scene, so they're kind of like... They kind of stood out a little bit, and, that's because Entombed was really... If you're, like... If you don't know anything about death metal, and you're, like, give me 10 death metal records, not knowing anything, like, I don't know if Entombed would stand out much more over a lot of that. At least the like Left Hand Path compared. No, I think it still would.
I think it would.
But yeah, like Left Hand Path and have Dismember and then have like Hypocrisy. I guess they all have the like, but to like somebody who's never heard it before, I don't know if it's
all going to sound the same at first until you can kind of piece it out. So, well, speaking of their older stuff and their more death metal roots, we're going to sort of move backwards the way that the CD compilation sort of moves. That's kind of the order.
There's really no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, it is. The only thing they do is they at least group it by EP, So we're jumping from 94 back to 92, and we've got a pair of songs that came out with the Stranger Eons EP in 92, and Stranger Eons, you can find that on the Clandestine record. So we decided not to include it because it's it's pretty much available out there.
Yeah.
What about Dusk and Shreds of Flesh? You sort of discovered something about these two songs.
I didn't realize that Shreds of Flesh was recorded off. It was a re-recording of.
It's Nihilist.
But Life Goes On
demo from '89. Yep.
Yeah, which I recently. Well, it's probably been a year now that Who put the thing out? Southern Lord put out that Nihilist, the complete Nihilist demo is like a 7-inch and a bunch of other garbage in there too, so that was on there. And I think, who put this other one out? Like,
I think it was The Man Records or the Music for Nations or whatever.
Yeah, 3 Man put it out originally, and then
Yep.
I think Candlelight licensed it in the States. But yeah, so that's a re-recording of that, and then Dusk is, I guess, kind of like a left-off, something that didn't make it on Clandestine. And I don't know about the entire record, but as far as what, a little bit of research I did, that the Stranger Aeons EP was basically just Ufe and Nikki hanging out, over the period of an evening, putting this thing together. Just the two of them. Nobody else did anything on the record.
And that's why, like, these two songs in particular sound so, like, stripped down and fast, and, like, there's not much, like, breathing space to them almost, probably because it was just two guys kind of throwing it all together.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've always loved, like, the way that, both songs just sort of come out and just blasting, especially Shreds of Flesh, just kills it.
And it's really kind of the last document of that era, because, as soon as we get after that, that's when, Wolverine Blues kind of comes in and really changes things up a lot. And then, LG comes back in the fold on vocals, and,
So this is Nikki singing on these two songs, correct?
Nikki and Ufe doing backing vocals, like he kind of did a lot, but...
And so why do you think that the vocals work so well here, but Nikki's don't? He's not able to pull it off, like when you get to like Clandestine, like the full length.
They don't bother me, but he's not a good vocalist in that capacity. I don't think he was. I think he was. I don't know if he was trying to like ape
what LG
was trying to do, like a more guttural, which he's not. Like he can actually sing.
Yeah.
So I think he has a higher register, and everything just seemed like he was kind of like on the verge of coughing all the time, and just had some weird. I mean, it never really threw me off too badly, but I've always liked LG. He's been my favorite vocalist for sure. But it was just a weird combination of vocally and then how complex that record was too. Like overly, like not in a prog sense, but just difficult to like the drum patterns are retarded.
Yeah, and I'm a famous Clandestine apologist, so
No, I don't have a problem with it at all. I've never had a problem with their progression really, and I've like dipped out at times and not listened to anything for a while, and then come back and kind of fill in the
same here. Kind of in the late '90s, I kind of like disappeared for a while until Uprising came out, and then kind of brought you and I both back.
Well, Uprising was, I think they started cutting all the fat out finally, and like kind of came back and like, okay, let's just do like this hard and fast, straight ahead record, and that got a lot of.
Yeah,
I know that's like one of Jacob Bannon from Converge is one of his like top records that he throws out there a lot. But.
Sure. So all right, well let's do it. Let's get into some covers and then into some original tunage, and then we'll end with a nice little. Well, it won't be a surprise for most of you, but a pleasant, famous tune that we'll talk about when we come back. So we got God of Thunder, Black Breath, Dusk, Shreds of Flesh, and then Crawl. You just heard Crawl, Shreds of Flesh, Dusk, Black Breath, and God of Thunder. And Crawl EP. This is
that's a big one.
This is a high point for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a year after Left Hand Path came out, and basically by the time we got Left Hand Path, it was probably well into 1990. I would say it wasn't like, you know, the month it came out or anything.
Sure.
So then, like, finding this, and it was so basically, you know, it's so different than we had, you know, another vocalist on here, Over Softstrom, who's in Nirvana 2002, which that was another thing. Like, okay, how are we going to find out this band?
Yeah.
So eventually, I think around the same time, I got that Projections of a Stained Mind comp that I found at, I believe, at White Earp Records, if I'm not mistaken, and that had a couple, you know, tunes from them on there as well. But a totally different approach, really, to vocals. A much more, not even real guttural, but whispery, and he definitely had his own, you know, kind of style.
Sure.
Compared to what LG was doing on the first record, which was, I guess, relatively kind of straight ahead. But yeah, Crawl, Forbidden, and Bitter Loss were,
Forsaken.
Forsaken, yeah, and Bitter Loss. I listened to that EP so many times on cassette that I about wear the thing out.
And I remember, like, you and Chris really selling this to me, you know, pretty hard and heavy when I started kind of coming around and borrowing stuff, and you guys would always make reference, and it wasn't readily available. It wasn't anything like you guys weren't going to like lend me your Crawl EP tape. You know what I mean?
It was
pretty obscure.
It was a cassette only, I think, in the States, and then it came out as a 12-inch single in Europe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it wasn't easy to find for some reason. I don't know if it was just a distribution thing, or like people, like EPs, or like tied overs until the full record came out, or what. But
sure.
Yeah, it was kind of a prized, possession there for a while.
And I know, like, just from a songwriting standpoint, like, the advancement was pretty incredible. You know, like, just, I don't know. I mean, everything with, like, the game was upped a bit from what Left Hand Path had been.
Even though they do re-record Bitter Loss.
Yeah.
But it's, different vocals and slightly, everything seems a little bit more, as far like a cohesion between the songs as far as the sonic kind of timbre of the whole thing. Like, Left Hand Path goes all over the place. It's got like, Left Hand Path itself is, with the Phantasm music and stuff in there is like this big epic thing, but then there's just like barn burners, and it's kind of an all over the place record, but all kind of fits. But this is it just kind of like a little slice in time. Like, here's what the refinement of Entombed almost,
now
before they go shit crazy and with Clandestine.
Well, I was gonna say, do you think it's for somebody like myself that I never heard these three songs until years later? I mean, I knew Bitter Loss from Left Hand Path, yeah, but I never heard Forsaken, and then this version of Crawl, and so I guess my anticipation for what I expected maybe out of Clandestine was maybe far different than you guys. I mean, how did this sort of like shape like what you were like anticipating and looking for from Clandestine, and then all of a sudden you get Nikki on vocals and all this other sort of like,
well, we thought it was Johnny Dordevic on vocals, which is the story that everybody's at least a lot of people around our generation know the story that Johnny Dordevic is kind of just this guy that maybe he looked good in photo shoots, so they put him on the back of things.
This like listless guy that
and for Carnage, he's got credit for playing bass, and he never played a fucking note. He might have
not on record, but
not on record, but played some live stuff. And like the Evelyn video he's in for Clandestine, as if he's singing. It's weird that, and I don't really know if I don't remember seeing any footage, like even like stuff up on YouTube of him ever doing anything live with them.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was just something like, okay, we've got the thing recorded, but we need a front man. So Johnny's a good dude. Let's bring him in here, do the photo shoot and whatever, and then throw it up there. But yeah, and it was never said that, unless it was just assumed that he was going to be the vocalist. So we'll just say he did the vocals on the album. Who cares? It's death metal.
Yeah,
kind of thing. But
so it didn't. Did it ruin anything for you? Think having like this expectation that you thought it would sound like the
no, because I think by that point we knew the Over Softstrom wasn't going to be in the band from like reading fanzines and stuff. So I'm pretty sure it was just.
And they brought him in because LG had left for Comicon, right?
Well, I think he just left because he's a drunk.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was like politics. I mean, they were kids. Like it could have been. I didn't feel like doing it anymore. This was dumb or whatever. But
sure.
Yeah, he ended up doing that Comicon, Megatrends and Brutalia. I don't remember what year that came out because he was gone for.
I think Megatrends came out in 91 or 92.
Okay,
I'm almost
so
positive.
that makes sense. And it's founded in 1949 by the Soviet Union. Okay, the Comicon. Yeah, I was just looking up on Wikipedia. But so that was, I don't know, I was kind of bummed that LG left, but it wasn't, I don't know, everything was happening so fast at that point as a kid that you were just trying to like stay up on what the hell was happening and like order new records and tape trade and try to write really bad reviews in your zine and all that kind of shit.
We were reminiscing about some of those earlier, and we were pulling out some old magazines and stuff like that. So getting back to what we were, kind of got sidetracked, back to Forsaken. What are your thoughts on this song? Because it is kind of the only original song on the record, and it's not an old Nihilist demo or something like what you heard before with like the Stranger Eon stuff. But
yeah, I don't really know if it really stuck out that much. Yeah, I think just the version of Crawl. Well,
was that the one you guys were sort of focused on? Was Crawl like I think the song kind of in a way, or
it was just because I don't know if it has like the slow intro where it slowly builds up with that riff, and it kind of reminded me of like the bolt thrower epitaph or something like that.
Yeah, okay. Well, it has a swing to it too, which especially
it's a weird riff. It's and then it was just kind of a bizarre song. That was one I was trying to get any like buddy I knew that kind of could play guitar to like show me how to play this riff.
To try.
And it's really way easier than we tried to do this weird crazy thing. I was like, no, there's no way that could be it. But yeah, having this and then kind of predating the whole Clandestine as well. So this was kind of I think kind of the standout song. And Bitter Loss is just, it has like a really good chorus to it, which is not something you usually hear about death metal stuff, but it's like really memorable. I can really like kind of like latched onto that. So Forsaken was just kind of like, yeah, it was there.
It was there.
Yeah. It wasn't something that really like got us super excited.
In hindsight too, the drum production, we were starting to talk about, is different obviously than what you hear in the drums with Clandestine with the version of Crawl.
Yeah, and even with like Left Hand Path it's notorious how the thing was cobbled together with a mixture of like triggered drums and partially live drums and a bunch of weird cymbals and stuff. It was a mess, but that's why it has that kind of unique tone. And this is like I think the first time him just playing a full live kit.
Yeah,
and having it being recorded, so it's a little bit airier and just sounds. The whole thing sounds a little bit more chaotic, I think, too.
Sure.
With the way he's playing, it's just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, it's succinct. It's tight.
The double bass is more present than it is on Left Hand Path. I think.
Yeah.
Everything's more. You can tell it's not, and I don't think you can tell that those are triggered or. It was just a mishmash of shit that they had there and made it sound good. It's like, okay,
yeah,
it sounds good to me, but.
Well, and then from the Crawl EP, which is kind of, for many people, kind of the ultimate of all of, the Entombed EPs, we sort of go into some different territory here. We take a really strange, left of center turn with Night of the Vampire. And we were listening to the original version of Night of the Vampire, which is a Roxy Erickson song from 13th Floor Elevators.
Yeah.
Some people probably know.
It's from...
You're Gonna Miss Me is sort of their big garage rock sort of song from the 60s.
I don't know where I wrote it down.
I think 1980 is where you had it. when he
it was Rocky Erickson and the Aliens.
Okay.
So 1980.
And he famously, of course, lost, kind of went insane from LSD, and we found out he was institutionalized and
took all kinds of electroshock therapy and Thorazine treatments, and this is post that. So it's very, it's almost very like 60s Alice Cooper sounding.
Yeah,
more weird. So than like something that would have come out in 1980. But
yeah,
it's a pretty faithful cover that they do. But it's going from Bitter Loss to Tonight.
But it's catchy as hell. I really dig Night of the Vampire, and it was put out as a split with the New Bomb Turks in 1995. And I've heard of the New Bomb Turks like here and there, but I've never actually like listened.
I think they're fairly just kind of like noisy, punky kind of stuff, and that seemed like a lot of things they were doing. Like either you'd see them wearing shirts of like Unsane, which Uwe was a huge fan of, and they ended up doing a cover of them as well. But it was more like noisy Dinosaur Jr. rock kind of stuff that seemed like
Sonic Youth they were way into.
Stuff that was like it was a little bit more, I don't know, it was noisy, and it was kind of like its own thing. It wasn't by any means like commercial, but it was just, I think the whole, because at this point death metal was just, it was so,
well, it was pretty played out.
It was really played out. It was like, if we're gonna do this stuff any longer, why? And they're young guys at this point too, like probably early 20s or something. It's like, what else can we really do with this stuff?
For sure, at least the Stockholm scene like was kind of just in a state of like, what what are we gonna do? Gothenburg thing was kind of doing its own thing, which was different and unique and kind of happening at this point. But a lot of
but still, they'd been in it since they were kids, so it's like, I mean, they
started Nihilist like at 87, so I mean they'd been like
probably 14,
8 years into it at this point.
Yeah, and when you're we've said that before, when you're that age, like you change so much year to year. I mean, you'll like one year you're not, you could be like this kid that's into skateboarding, and then all of a sudden you're the black metal kid. You go through crazy changes.
Everybody has a black metal phase
very quickly at that age, I think.
And there's even those low points where you're like really, really hooked on like symphonic black metal for like a summer or two.
It happened a little bit.
Everybody experiment with symphonic black metal in the late 90s.
I got out of there pretty quick.
The drug of choice.
Yeah.
So,
but I think even though like I almost kind of see Entombed kind of in the same vein as like MC5, where they would play alongside free jazz bands, like.
Yeah.
If you had the same like kind of idea or mentality about your music, then that's what was kind of like I think like drawing other bands and them to other bands, that kind of mentality, and not necessarily the scene that they're in or.
Yeah, and anything. I think it was hard for me in growing up in the kind of 90s as I did, and trying to grow along with Entombed and trying to figure out like where they were going, especially in the post Nicky era there for a few years, because I didn't really know like what to do with like State of Emergency, or not State of Emergency, but Same Difference and like Black Juju and some of that. Yeah. I mean, some of it's just not great quality Entombed to be honest. It's not their best record.
Kind of a different band.
Yeah. Really, So, and it's hard because you're trying to sort of run with it. But when I hear some of this stuff, I think if I had encountered Night of the Vampire in 95, because I don't think I heard it for, until this compilation came out in 97, I definitely would have dug it, because it has enough of a, in the same way that like God of Thunder has like kind of just an undercurrent of like rock but evil, still sort of working, almost like a Danzig kind of thing or something going on for it. But definitely very cool, And then we get punk band Stiff Little Fingers, State of Emergency, and I have heard quite a bit of Stiff Little Fingers. I like what I've heard. I think this actually is one of the very first Stiff Little Fingers songs they ever wrote was State of Emergency. I'm
going to plead ignorance to a lot of that.
And this came out in the Full of Hell sort of single. We were, you're commenting, you've never even seen this or heard of it, and it
has the same cover as Out of Hand.
Yeah,
but it has Full of Hell on it, and it has the same other bonus tracks of or did it have God of Thunder?
It had God of Thunder, but not Black Breath.
What was on it instead of Black Breath? You remember?
State of Emergency.
Okay.
Yep. So that's what they replaced it with. So it's just kind of a weird thing, they took like the same package and just sort of redid it, for Full of Hell. So, but
why not? I guess you already got the artwork.
It's a good, it's a good little, like kind of early 80s sort of punk kind of vibe to it,
Yeah.
And this is sort of where Entombed was headed, in a strange sort of way. It was like very predictable where they were going to go.
Oh, sure.
With songs like this. And even really Vandal X, which we'll play next. And Vandal X was not released on anything. And Unsane, for those of you that don't know, is this sort of like, amphetamine rep band, very noisy, kind of was always really linked to skateboarding because of their very famous video that like got a lot of play on MTV. I don't know if you remember that one where it was just like it was a compilation of like people like wiping out skateboarding. I really remember that, and it kind of made them kind of a big deal for a little while.
Okay. So yeah, they eventually went on to they put out a couple of records through Relapse too.
Yeah, I remember that. So and then we discovered on the Vandal X, if you let it play a little longer, which we won't let it play the full 7 minutes.
We'll let you do that.
Yeah, you can find it on your own, but there's a nice little bonus kind of going on there. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on State and Vandal? Anything sort of jump out to you because you're sort of more locked into this era of Entombed? I think the sort of late 90s.
Yeah, I mean, really, I skipped over those two for the most part when I'd listened to it.
When it's to the count.
Yeah, because the Vandal X is just, it's almost like the end of a song.
Yeah.
It's just kind of this like fury of shit happening for 2 minutes. So I don't know like how
Unsane's a hard band to do a cover of because it's like Unsane is just it just is what it is,
Yeah, but it seems like maybe it was that like part between two other songs that made it make more sense. It just seems like a really bizarre thing to try to cover.
Sure. And of course we will do a very awkward transition from Vandal X into Serpent Speech from the Hollow Man EP, but yeah, so be it.
Well, yeah, and State of Emergency is kind of a weird, song too compared to everything else on all the other covers on the record too, but I don't know. It still has that kind of like the crushing bass and kind of
little DB
drum
kind of thing
shit happening to it too. So it still had the the thrust of Entombed. But
well, and then I guess introduce us to Hollow Man EP because this really was the first time you guys had heard this sound from them because you got this way before Wolverine Blues. So,
yeah.
And these are songs, these three that aren't on this compilation. And I don't know. I would imagine Hollow Man. I don't know if is it readily available? Is it something you can probably grab on Amazon? You can probably get it.
It was out there all over the place.
Okay. I didn't know if it was like rare that much or not.
I don't think so because this is...
Because it was a Columbia thing, right? So...
Yeah, not yours.
Oh, what's that?
You got the Earache version.
Woohoo! Good for me. Nice.
But, yeah, I don't know. That was just like in the normal rotation and like I don't think we're even thinking about it that much. And we didn't absorb music quite. If it was like something we like, because I remember like when me and Chris got Necroticism from Carcass, we got that at the record store, went back to his house and sat like two little girls talking on the phone, like talking about boys, like sitting just staring at reading all the medical lyrics and listening to that thing like 4 times over in his room.
Yeah.
So there's things like that where it's like an immediate. And this was more just like, okay, cool, this is what's tiding us over until this came out. And then it has like, this weird stuff we're not going to play necessarily, but the Hellraiser thing where it's just a bunch of, they're kind of like jamming with like, Hellraiser quotes kind of being sampled in the background.
It's essentially what I did for one of my audio production final projects in college, which is I just threw a whole bunch of metal riffs underneath shitty movie samples. So
there you go.
I got an A.
Of course. They don't know what it is. They don't want to.
Exactly.
Okay, he tried. That's fine. Here we go.
But yeah,
but these are more like, I mean, the songs are kind of more goofy too. Like just straight ahead is like when like Bonehouse, which
the sequel to Roadhouse. I'm telling you, man.
Yeah, it's either. It depends on the era in which you hear the term. If you heard Bonehouse in like the 1940s, you'd think, oh, this is like where they throw animal carcasses. Yeah. 70s might be more. This is like where you go to bone, like you go to fuck. It's a whorehouse or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's a weird, and I think
it's just a really terrible barbecue joint.
The Bonehouse. It's all that's left over from the bone. And there's we do have lyrics, but I won't really. I'm guessing it's just some kind of abstract mental crap that they're talking about.
Yeah.
And then Serpent Speech as well, which
Serpent Speech is a great song.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's probably just a throwback to the Garden of Eden kind of.
Yeah. But it could have been on Wolverine Blues. Like it was.
Sure.
It was a pretty good standard song. So, but all right. Well, we'll go out with we'll start with some Forsaken, then some Bitter Loss. Then we got the Night of the Vampire, State of Emergency, Vandal X, Serpent Speech, and we'll end with Bonehouse.
For your pleasure.
Bonehouse, Serpent Speech, Vandal X, State of Emergency, Night of the Vampires, Bitter Loss. We start off with Forsaken. And for your pleasure, we actually found out what Bonehouse is all about. It's actually a more serious song than what we were giving it credit for. And
Kenny Hawkinson wrote it, right?
yeah, Kenny Hawkinson from Bohansen. No, Dick Hawkinson, which again, that doesn't lend the song any credit, the fact that his name's Dick. But
Yeah.
no, it's actually about drug addiction and things like that. So
And dumb fuck despair.
yeah, it's kind of
Or skulls will roll.
taking
instead of stones.
your woes into in misery and hiding them through drugs and different things like that. So
As we all do.
yeah, as we all do. And so now with some class to end, and now I think on some level when you have songs like Bonehouse and Put Off the Scent, I think you realize why they showed up on the EP.
Yeah.
As we're sort of like laughing about it, and we do think they're decent songs, but again, it's just not of the same ilk that maybe some of the stuff on Wolverine Blues was. But yeah, any thoughts on any of these things? The Hollow Man EP.
I remember listening to it. I think the funny thing is the most memorable song on there to me is the Hellraiser.
Is the Hellraiser theme?
Don't look at me. Yeah, just because I know that at least that first movie so well that
Yeah.
they did kind of an interesting mashup of Hellraiser and Entombed shit. But
And even like the Wolverine Blues is so weird on there, where it's basically someone in the band just kind of talking about like
it's like nature documentary,
yeah, but they're like clearly
voiceover.
like drunk when they're doing it too. So because it's like mocking the nature documentary and stuff like that.
or occasionally fuck another member of its misanthropic breed.
But well, it's been fun, kind of throwing together, kind of a fun, lighthearted sort of group of songs together in a very eclectic mix that really shows you, I think, the strange personality of a band like Entombed, that they can get away with anything from Vandal X to Bonehouse to God of Thunder to even
And you'll just remember Bonehouse. That's
Black Breath,
Yeah.
So. But so enjoy Put Off the Scent, which was also can be found on the Hollow Man EP
Or on YouTube.
or on YouTube if you will. So
As is anything.
yeah, exactly. So enjoy this as we say goodbye. And for Requiem Metal Podcast and Entombed, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.